But I knew this is not the right thing to do. I knew this is retrograde and I should just have patience and a bit of courage. And it took a while. I mean, patience and courage were not that easy also to give me that contentment. It was tough. But I was delighted to have done it. What really saved me were totally unintended events. I mean, every now and then I would try to, as they say, bite the bullet and stay the course. And then suddenly something unexpected happened that gave me another, lift in that course. I wanted to be independent. I wanted to be in a situation that I'm not totally enslaved to a fixed salary. As though I was waiting for my subsequent encounter with Chinmaya and others to be able to take time off as and when I wanted.
Then you leave England, you went to Beirut, established your private independent consulting company, and excelled, at least in business matters. And in one of your visits to the Gulf or to Kuwait, you came across this extraordinary person, Chinmaya, whom you have said many times was the most important influence on your life.
As good as anybody could have it. When I saw this man, I somehow felt he has something I don't have. And so I happened to be on the same flight, and I wanted to know who he is. So I took the excuse of going after his forehead dot of booty. So I asked him, what is this? He said, you're not asking about this, sit down. So I was still at that time young and full of my own biographical successes. So anyway, I sat down and he said, look, you're really after to know what is the secret of total inner contentment and happiness. He then said something very strange. He said, you have maybe I had 2 or 3 cars. He said, you have cars, you have all of this. You're not really deep down, totally happy and content. I said, my God, this man is reading my innermost, quite dangerous. So that was the encounter. I knew he has something I don't have. But it was later on that I knew that it isn't something I must have. It is what I have to lose. That which he had, I have also, and everybody else has. Later on, as he taught me, he said, nobody has more than anybody else. It's just that they have their own illusions, they have their desires, they have their attachments. Those you have to get rid of. So that's what really was, for me, the biggest clear mapping as to how balanced life could be.
But such dramatic encounters, I mean, I know you don't really attribute to them kind of overarching significance, but they seem to be a recurrent theme, that something dramatic, untoward happens, and a person is then reawakened to one's potential. Is this something that is necessary or emblematic, let's say, or not?
I think nature puts us all through such possibilities, including disasters. I think the biggest gift of nature is disasters. But we blame and claim and we don't go into the meaning of them. So encounters, unusual events are galore. But we are preoccupied somewhere else. I remember in Beirut, across my apartment, there would be at Fajr, you know how Beirut also at that time beginning to have chaos. And this was a street sweeper right on Rosher, next to the ocean. The way he swept, it was as though he was caressing his mother's hair or some beauty. So, I was so intrigued about the way this man was treating his job. He was present in it. And when I ventured to be near him and ask him, he wouldn't even talk to me. He would just say, I'm doing my job. So encounters become significant if you give them that significance. In the case of Chinmaya, it was dramatic, I don't deny that. But I've had many such lessons. One of the biggest lessons I remember was from a very old Sudanese lady in the Prophet's precinct, next to the Prophet's tomb in Medina. I was going for my lunch. I was a bit delayed and I was very hungry. She was selling peanuts. So I thought I'll buy a little bit of peanuts before I get to my lunch. I knew there's a fabulous lunch waiting for me. So, and I didn't want to carry coins because they rattle in my pocket. So I took a small cone because I wasn't going to eat too much. So, and gave her a note. So she wanted to return for me coins. I said, no, please take the coins. She took the coin back from my hand, emptied it back, and gave me the note. She said, go. I said, but look, I can't eat it all. She said, that's your problem. I have to sell you at the price that it is. The money is your problem. I mean, that was for me one of the best lessons. I've had many such encounters. I can quote you dozens of such things.
I'm sure.
A porter in Mumbai, where I tipped him more than his daily wage. But the way I tipped it was as though I am condescending. You know, here I am, this important person, giving you more than your daily wage as a tip. He returned it to me. The way he looked at me, he said, do you think I need you? So, I mean, these are encounters, you know, they're huge encounters.
After meeting Chinmaya, as I recall from your discussions on this time in this period, you spent about 8 years, 7 to 8 years, visiting him on a regular basis, being in his company, traveling with him. What was the central theme of all of that? Was it an attempt to try to rediscover the forces inside you? What was it all about?
I didn't have such a clear agenda at all. It was attraction and constant benefits. It was love, really. Whenever I was with him, I enjoyed every minute as though I was having a reconstitutional, if you like, revamping. And seeing a man in this world operating in a manner that doesn't leave any precipitation upon him was for me the ultimate gift. Here he is acting all kinds of projects, hundreds, thousands of people, every 2 weeks in one location, having a program of expounding upon the Gitas and so on. And yet, as though he was not touched, engaging with people, sharing with them, laughing with the young people, participating in life, and yet an element or aspect in him was above it or not touched by it. This for me was the most fascinating possibility on existence.
And one thing jumps out is that you come from a tradition, at least an outer tradition, that is completely unique, self-contained in itself. And then to be attracted to a person from, as it were, a polar opposite is really quite unusual. I mean, I don't know any case of a person raised in a, as it were, in a Muslim tradition, making such a, or taking a teacher at such an exalted level, a person from an entirely different tradition. And if I just an amusing anecdote, it was when that had happened, the news somehow filtered back into our own social circles. And it was seen as an extremely aberrant, even outrageous event, that the son of one of Karbala's most famous religious scholars and alims becomes, as it were, a Hindu. Of course, this was a complete misconstruing of what actually happened. But when you encountered Chinmaya, you seemed not to have any cultural baggage with you.
No. Also, I didn't see any, as you described it as being from the opposite. There was no opposite. I found in him a conduct or a quality that I was familiar with. I really didn't find it at all incongruous. And nor did I have any interest in the rituals. Nor did he in any way try to have me initiated in any of the Hindu practices or rituals. He was way above it. And he saw me as a visitor who had come as though I've come there to be illumined or to like a candle to be lit, and that was it. There was no other, they wasn't going to reshape me or rechange me or none of those whatsoever. He was the most gracious host, and the people around him were most generous to me, and I was imbibing conduct that he was giving, and what he received was much more from the unseen. There was nothing visible. I mean, he lived as a sannyas, he had his saffron robe, and when he traveled to even foreign lands and so on, it was the tiniest of all little suitcases. So for me, it was really traveling with a godly being in the shape or in the form or a cultural background of a Hindu. So also in Karbala, we had a lot of visitors from India. So I wasn't unfamiliar with the, if you like, the outer appearances of their dress or the women in their sari. But for me, it was an immense love affair.
But it seems that he didn't treat you as a classical disciple or murid in a teacher-taught relationship. He treated you as a person about to be an equal, I assume.
Absolutely. Totally, totally. I share with you, for example, a case where there was a hospital, and this was a big hospital in central India, and there were, it's a big, sizable hospital, and the top doctors were quarreling about jockeying for a new position. So he was going there, and I would travel with him. There were only two of us. After a day or two, we would be there in the boardroom. He told them that, look, you have been sacrificing your life, you've been learning, you have been benefiting. So this way of for you competing with each other is not conducive for the charity that you are also offering and so on. So they were all ashamed and they all accepted to whatever between them. Even at the end, they were offering each other the higher position, the declining. In other words, humbleness began to. So he suddenly turned quietly to me, because being an outsider, this is why I'm giving you this example. He said, let us leave before they discover the whole thing is a nonsense, being on this world. Let's get out before. So, I mean, there were things like this that he confided in me, if you like, in a Sufi language, deep secrets, so to speak. The asrar, there was no secrets there. He says, look, this whole business of life on this earth is a tiny little, flesh. Your soul, your ruh, the Atman in you is alive forever. That is why you are here to discover it. So there was nothing in his teaching, in his exchanges with me, was incongruous to what I had known or felt would be part of what I would have known had I stayed more in the, if you like, higher level of Islamic, if you like, Arfani traditions. Not once have I found any opposition or difficulty in it, whatsoever.
In his being, he seems to have absorbed all the great religious traditions and transcended them.
Absolutely. Transcended them, I think, is the key, because as time went by, he would even greet me in an Islamic way. Salaamu Alaikum, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, things like that. And at the end, I was beginning to feel on occasions that his favoritism towards me was causing some jealousy and some envy and so on, because I was not to stay there. I mean, they appointed me to be as part of many of their boards of charities and so on. I never attended. And they called me Shaykh Haeri, whatever. So I was given a very high, if you like, position amongst the hierarchy there. He didn't care about it, I didn't care about it. Others tried without much pushing. I must say they were courteous. But I never took to any of the rituals, cultures, or whatever. I enjoyed the chanting. I would go into a trance or into deep meditation. But that's about it. I was there really to take. I was there absolutely to take what was God-given and ignoring the human side.
Here you are in an airport. You bump into a person whom you immediately take on to be your guide and teacher. You spend 7 years with him. The person does not try to influence in any shape or form. The way in which you were formed religiously did not try to impose on you any structures or strictures. And then here we come to the third most astounding aspect. He basically asked you to leave and go back to your own spiritual traditions. Yes. Why would he do that?
I think he realized that I now am, I must have the outer boundaries or a frame because I wasn't practicing Hinduism with him. I wasn't practicing. So I think he must have felt that I now have to unite the haqiqah part that I began to absorb from him with an outer manifestation. I think he wanted me to be within the full package, if you like. I think he knew as a doctor that the medication I've had enabled me now to accept the full, if you like, the medical package.
I mean, to put it another way, would you say that he wanted to, you had this core, this heart, this central teaching, he wanted to give it a kind of protective sheath?
I don't think he wanted. I think he must have felt I needed it now.
Needed.
I think it was a doctor treating a patient. That there wasn't much more for me just carrying on. It would have been more of the same. And I would be enjoying it, and I'm very happy, and nobody wants to be weaned. But I think he felt that I needed now this medicine of accepting the outer and accepting the culture, accepting the history, you know, in a sense.
And then I remember you said, you wrote to him and you said, what was obvious to you is now obvious to me.
Yes.
So the obvious has become the obvious.
That's it.
And its utter simplicity.
In the sense that it was said before, I thought I understand it because all to do with the mind and the intellect. But now I know it, that there's none other than the one, and you have to be constantly in reference to that because that's your life. Everything else is peripheral. So that's the truth.
So you basically experienced what was always there, an all-encompassing zone that is not accessible through the intellect or through.
That's right. Which later on, as I began to reflect upon it more, teach a bit more, I realized that really life is based on these two zones. One is a life that has got its main emphasis through space and time, with beginning such as birth and end such as death. And this life is attributed to the person, and this life is, in a way, takes over its need or its manifestation of survival as a key thing. This is one zone, but the real purpose or the real direction is a life that is infinite, or a consciousness that is boundless. And the two are inseparable. And I then began to also interpret some of the teachings from our own traditions and the Quran, that, for example, these two oceans meet in you. One of them does not overcome the other. One ocean is timelessness, infinitude, and the other one is limited, which is the so-called me. And if the so-called me does not lead me to the ultimate reality in me, which is my soul or spirit, then I'm not liberated. Then I've not completed the journey. Then I'm still under that, you know, limiting, if you like, dimension. So it began to unfold, and many of what I learned also with Chinmaya and others, with Krishnamurti and a few other people, made sense. And I felt our deen has it all in a simpler way, but it has to be lived, and it can only be lived by those who are living it as well. It has to be transmitted, not just maintained as a formal, if you like, ritual. And that really dawned upon me, and I felt so fortunate for not being forced also into the ritualistic side without having it complemented with the transformative side. So I think it was perfect timing for me to come back and rediscover, if you like, the Muhammadi path and package as most workable and easy, provided it is totally absorbed rather than talked about or preached. It has to be in every way accepted, and then a person will realize its fruit, which is personal. That your thinking is not the same. Your lens of relating events is not the same. It takes you to another dimension. And I think this is what really happens. So Chinmaya was essential in that, to prepare me. In other words, it was my Mecca. It was anything goes, anything is possible. It's only light. There's nothing else. Everything else is a fallacy. But I had to come and live in this world, you know, to see the fallacy has in it truth as well. Chaos has order in it as well. So it was the right way in a sense, without me knowing that, but I somehow inadvertently had been put through a program of first coming to taste there is this magnificent, absolute, ever-present reality. It's a mystery. But equally, the early steps of it, the human side of it, which leads to the divine side of it, is there in a way reflecting it, but in a diluted fashion. You know, and that is too, all of it is indicating its origin. And so I came back to live it, and I found that it was correct. You know, it was real. Even the troubles and the difficulties one is subjected to have their outer, if you like, manifestation, which we want to avoid, but an inner teaching and learning, which if we dissociate ourselves from the event, then we find a great deal of meaning and development and evolvement from.
And then came a period where you encountered all kinds of quite remarkable people, mainly spiritual teachers in the Sufi tradition. Probably the most significant in terms of your future development was Shaykh Abdul Qadir, the Scottish, or the Scots formerly known as Ian Dallas.
Yes.
He was your first port of call, as it were.
Yes.
And Chinmaya pointed him out as
Yes.
being possibly your starting point in re-entering into your own religious tradition. What did you get from that experience, the early experiences with Shaykh Abdul Qadir?
I felt there was a great deal of genuine, serious movement, that these people from an alien culture, Western, British, European, Scottish, visiting them in their different places, especially in their main centers in England, reminded me as though they were trying to live early Islam in its simplicity. A very strong Sufi Moroccan type of flavor. At that time they were very much into that. So they were dressed as Moroccans. They changed, you know, the styles a few times as time went by. But I felt it is as close as you can get to original or early Islam. Yeah. It was very attractive, very, very beautiful in that sense. And I imbibed a lot of that. And in fact, it reminded me a lot of my childhood in Karbala. You know, I found it exceptionally easy to be with them. The generosity, the gifting, the serving, the helping, and all of that. And the communal type of living. So for me, it was an easy re-entry to what I considered my own interpretation as original Islam. I felt these people are trying to really get to that point. And they're sincere, real, and honest. And so it was for me a big, big gift in every way.
I mean, would you say that experience and subsequent engagements or encounters with other such people opened for you the need, as it were, to translate this unfoldment in the absolute into outer action?
Absolutely, inseparably. I also felt that because of history, because of the usual natural atrophies, that the rank and file of most Muslims is not in any way according to the original package, which is the outer and the inner are inseparable, and a ritual without a meaning is ridiculous, and a meaning without a form also cannot exist. So I found that really we have within the Muhammadi package all what is needed, but it needs to be lived, and also it needs to be reflected by others. And also I realized the importance of teachers who can impart with that. And I think this, to my mind, was the recognition of the impoverishment of most of the Muslim communities, unless they were enlightened teachers. And of course the Sufis had that line. I also realized early on with Shaykh Abdul Qadir that the days of the Sufi traditions of lines and of all of that and their habits cannot last. I felt that the impact of the hegemony of the Western way of life and its secular emphasis and all of that will put an end to the hundreds of years of tradition of Sufis maintaining what I consider to be original Islam, with a flavor. Each tariqah had a different flavor. So these were very early, if you like, inner insights of mine, that that incredible gift that came to all human beings for hundreds or thousands of years will come to an end soon. Something else better may replace it, but I don't know what. Now I can say it was that the horizontal aspect of spreading the human balance of humanity, divinity, would come to an end, and now it has to be vertical. Individuals must within themselves experience the presence of the absolute. And then they also have to accept boundaries and accept the ethics and all that. So,
in your, you talk about the absolute as, in its essence, it's obviously unreachable. It is one that cannot be approached either by state or by intellect. But at least those elements inside the human constitution, as it were, that can reverberate with it. In order for you to reach that zone of absolute transcendence, of that zone of absolute consciousness, the presence, as it were, the entire world seems to conspire in order to put a stop to this natural human desire or impulse. So
yeah.
what is a counter to that? If the outer material world, human relationships, community, culture, psychology, sociology, everything about the way that the modern world is constructed conspires against the person trying to make that leap.
Yeah.
So what is it that is left in the individual that allows him or her to make that leap?
I think the biggest obstacle is the human mind. There are three big obstacles. The human mind, because it is geared to give me better survival on this earth. So it wants to perpetuate that. As a result, the language also becomes odd because it says, how do you reach it? There is nothing to reach. I am obsessed by it. I am possessed by it. God dominates. The light of God is the only light from which every other light emanates. So it isn't something I can reach. So this is because I've been used to constantly get it, reach it, take it, output, outcome. So I'm used to the survival zone of consciousness, which is tiny, and I'm trying to now experience and come to live and know the arrival zone, which is the absolute or supreme consciousness or pure consciousness. It's the other way around. So this business of everything in existence seems to conspire, as I am conspiring. Because I've not been given from the beginning this simple diagram or a drawing or a map that, look, you are two entities. Your one is to do with mind and biography and identity and fear of time and the treasuring of time. And the other one is your timelessness. I've not been given that simply. But it is in our deen. The Quran is full of it. I can only see the Quran and the teaching or the prophetic teaching through that lens. If you distill the entire Quran into what it is that there is only oneness. But as long as I see two-ness, I see I and otherness and enemies, and so I'm not within that, ultimate, if you like, truth that the Quran reveals, that there's only oneness. The other thing that the Quran, if you distill it all, is that your life begins after you leave your body, akhirah. The whole thing is about akhirah. We don't give any attention. So leave it. So later on, طال عمرك. So our natural day-to-day habits is not according to that primal map. That this phase of existence, as all the Abrahamic traditions teach, when Jesus says it's like a bridge, you don't build a house in the middle of a bridge, we don't live it anymore. It had become the all-consuming, and that's all what matters. So that's why people say, but now let us be real. This reality is a flimsy reality that has in it some spark of absolute reality, total reality, timeless reality, spaceless reality. So, I see the whole conspiracy is us human beings have only built our entire thing on this beginning part of our spiritual, or if you like, evolution altogether. We're not evolved. That's why we are killing ourselves. We are killing the ecology. We're desperate about everything. We become outwardly far more wealth outwardly, and also equally a lot of poverty inwardly. So I think we are not following nature. I think we are actually against nature. Nature is that Homo sapiens began to discover some other zone of consciousness. That is why we are really distinguished from the other, if you like, apes and so on. But we're not following that. And we separated it. This is spiritual matter. Now this is a church issue or a mosque issue. Once you begin to separate it, then we are broken down. We become schizophrenic. But I am both. I am a human. Once my human side is fulfilled, my body is in reasonable state, my mind is reasonably, clear, and so on. Then I want to know what else, what next. And if I don't go to the transcendental of it, I become greedy. I become, I create chaos as we are doing. Most of our, wealthier people could have stopped much earlier in accumulating and being abusive and being unjust by caring for themselves. But no, control, control, control. I feel I'm totally under control, but I don't attempt to control. If it is given to me something to control, put this there, so I will do it. Minimal. So the question of decree and destiny, to what extent am I free, or to what extent it is predestined? I am free only in limited situations. I am free to speak or not to speak, or few things. But I'm not free to say that if I do this and this and this, in 5 years' time I'll be the happiest man on earth. No way. I will never be. There are so many new factors that comes that will change my destiny. So these are the things that we need to be shown or taught as kids, but we are not. So we have ended up by having few rituals, and therefore it becomes divisive. More sectarian, more this, more and more. They're not exactly the same. The otherness. The Quran says, not until you treat your enemy as your closest friend. Not until then. You are not near enough to be awakened as to who you really are. Once you discover that, then you find everybody else potentially is the same. Everybody is a spirit or a soul. They are divine, but they don't know. They have not had the same opportunity. So you have maybe occasionally some empathy, sympathy, or if there isn't anything you can do, you don't do it. But there will be justice in that. You treat everybody as potentially the same.
So on this lower level of what you call, I think, limited or conditioned consciousness, which is the consciousness that one has when one deals with what is called the outer world, the material world, the tools that you have. It has enormous defenses. It has created all kinds of ramparts around it that would make it difficult, not difficult, but at least these ramparts in the mind or in the experience of the individual are real. The ramparts come in various shapes and forms, all of them designed to make the person unwilling or incapable of acknowledging the absolute, the other zone. These ramparts are one's experience of space, one's experience of time. Also the way it's filtered through the intellect, through reason and logic, which can only understand the language of causality. And on the collective side, culture, nations, ethnicities play their part in confining and constricting. And on the individual side, there's also the element of mind, which has been deconstructed into psychology, into emotions, into sensuality, and all of that. So you have all of these fortresses that modern man, it seems, has built to eliminate in his experience or her experience the traces of the sacred. Let's call it the traces of the sacred. And each one of these fortresses is massive in one's own cognition of it, in the context of limited consciousness. You said that the mind has to be shifted because it is the point, the narrowest point in which everything is funneled. the illusory reality of these obstacles are nevertheless real for those enmeshed in limited or conditioned consciousness. So the trigger in your case may have been everything came to a point when you saw it embodied in the person of Chinmaya, for example. Before that, there were stirrings and yearnings and glimpses and so on. But it took on a channelized form. The notion of the sacred, which has been deconstructed in the mind of modern man, is essential to bring the person the potential to actualize what you experience. Would you agree on that?
I agree with you entirely, except I would also put it in a slightly different frame. I don't need to have the notion of the sacred to seek the absolute. I need to suffer from my day-to-day life. I need to suffer from the inadequacy. I need to suffer from my vacancy. I need to suffer from my not being truly, deeply, sustainably content. That will drive me.
Would you say exhaustion?
Yes,
Suffering leading to exhaustion?
Deep, subconscious, if you like, exhaustion.